Jorah Mormont begins Game of Thrones in exile, only returning to Westeros when he's ordered by Daenerys Targaryen to find a cure for grayscale. However, could he instead have been at the wall when the show started? While his father was Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Jorah, played by Ian Glenn in Game of Thrones cast, was leagues away, trying to reclaim his place in Westeros by serving as a spy on Daenerys Targaryen for Varys, before switching allegiances to Dany herself. Jorah's story is thus defined by his unwavering loyalty to, and love for, Khaleesi, even dying for her in Game of Thrones ending. He tries to be a man of honor, and that's in part as redemption for his past. His crimes were bad enough to draw the attention of Ned Stark, and force him to Essos. That was lucky for Daenerys, in the end, even if it initially brought great shame upon Jorah's family. The full story behind Jorah Mormont's exile in Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones left out several details about Jorah's backstory. Jorah's exile is because he was caught selling poachers to Tyroshi slavers, rather than sending them to the Night's Watch. The Seven Kingdoms of Westeros be a land filled with murder, but even their slavery is considered one of the most terrible crimes a person can commit. Rather than face justice from Ned, Jorah chooses to flee into exile in Essos, heading to Lies. However, the decision wasn't just influenced by a desire to save his own neck. The backstory to Jorah selling slavers is that he had married a much younger, more beautiful woman, Lynesse Hightower, whom he had met at a tourney at Lannisport. When they returned to Bear Island, the Mormonts' ancestral home, things turned sour as Lynesse, used to the climate and finery of the south, struggled to adapt to the harsh north. Thus, Jorah spent trying to please his wife with gifts, food, and journeys to the south, but achieved financial ruin in the process. Him selling the poachers into slavery was a desperate attempt at making money to settle the debts he had accrued, and going into exile was an equally desperate attempt to hang on to his life with Lynesse. The pair went to Lies together because that's where she wanted to go, but eventually she found a new lover, and Jorah was forced by him to leave her behind, venturing more across Essos and spending time with the Dothraki. However, all the show reveals is that he had no money and an expensive wife, who left him for another man. Ned Stark wanted to kill Jorah Mormont. It doesn't seem like the Night's Watch was an option. Ned Stark preparing to execute Will in Game of Thrones Season 1, Episode 1. Ned Stark was a man bound by duty and honor. As the Warden of the North, it was upon him to carry out the king's justice to the people of the region. Typically, criminals are given the option to take the Black, where their crimes will be forgotten as they enter a life of servitude to the Night's Watch. Ned knows better than anyone the importance of the Watch, with his own brother, Ben-Jen, serving there, so it's possible this would have been an option for Jorah. However, there are a few lines in A Game of Thrones that suggest otherwise. Firstly, from Daenerys' point of view, that would certainly imply Ned's decision was to execute Jorah, similar to how he had to kill Will, the Night's Watch deserter. In Game of Thrones Season 1, Jorah himself says, "Ned Stark wants my head." There's also no guarantee Jorah would have taken the Black. His father was at the wall, and he would have had to go there and face him having disgraced and shamed his family, a reunion he no doubt would rather avoid, albeit perhaps still preferable to losing one's head, but maybe that's just me. Jorah did almost join the Night's Watch in Game of Thrones ending. He could have been reunited with Jon Snow. Jon Snow, Kit Harington, and Jorah Mormont, Ian Glenn, with the sword Longclaw in Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 6. Jorah may not have taken the Black before Game of Thrones, but there were discussions about him doing so at the very end of the show. Ahead of Season 8, the writers looked at ways to have Jorah survive Game of Thrones and end up at the wall, with writer Dave Hill saying,